Blade and Morbius, Blood Rain. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days, drenching the city in filth and rot, as if the sky itself was mourning what was coming. Blade moved through the alley with his coat clinging to him like a wet shroud. The scent of blood was in the air, fresh, metallic, bitter. Another body had been found, throat torn, chest hollowed out like an animal had gorged itself. Only this wasn't an animal. This was something older. Smarter. Hungrier. He'd seen it before, in his nightmares. The police chalked it up to gang violence. Blade knew better. These were ritual kills. Marks carved in the flesh. Symbols that pulsed when you looked too long. Vampires didn't do this, but something worse did. Morbius sat alone in his lab, skin pale, eyes twitching, the hunger inside him becoming unbearable. He hadn't fed in days, trying to stay human, trying to stay himself. But something was calling him. He could hear it, whispers through the city sewer grates, voices curling under his door at night, whispering in tongues older than humanity. "Come home," they hissed. The Crimson God stirs. He dismissed it as madness at first. Then the dreams began. Blood rivers. Flesh walls. Eyes blinking from the ceilings. And always, a throne made of bones, and something sitting on it, breathing, waiting. That night, their paths crossed. Blade stormed a warehouse in Brooklyn, chasing the stench of death. Inside, he found Morbius, crouched over a twitching corpse, face soaked in blood. But Morbius wasn't feeding. He was crying. "I didn't do this," he whispered. Around them, the bodies began to twitch. Mouths sewn shut split open. Voices gurgled in unison, "He is coming." The lights exploded, and the walls started to bleed. Blade didn't hesitate, he drew his sword. The hunt had begun. The cathedral loomed in the heart of the ruined district, its steeples bent like broken fingers clawing at the blood-colored sky. Blade stood before the gates, the stench of rot and sulfur thick in his lungs. He hadn't heard from Morbius in days, not since the warehouse incident. But the trail led here, to this blasphemous place that pulsed like a living thing. The massive doors creaked open on their own, groaning like tortured wood. Inside, the floor was slick with a dark crimson fluid, and the air buzzed with an unnatural hum, like flies made of static. This was no holy place. This was a wound in the world. And something was festering inside. He stepped cautiously into the nave, every instinct screaming. The pews were twisted and fused together by sinew, as if the furniture had been grown from flesh. At the altar, creatures writhed, mutated vampires stripped of all reason, blind, shrieking, their mouths lined with teeth inside teeth. They chanted in a language not meant for human throats. And at the center, bound in chains forged from his own blood, was Morbius. His body convulsed violently, veins bulging, skin tearing and healing over and over. Something was changing him. Something was inside him. "Get away," Morbius gasped, his voice mangled. "I can't hold it back." The air rippled. One of the blind vampires lunged. Blade struck with fluid precision, slicing the thing in half. But it didn't die, it screamed in ecstasy, dragging its innards toward him. The cathedral itself seemed to respond. Walls bled. The ceiling cracked open like a skull. And from the shadows behind the altar, a figure emerged, towering, eyeless, wrapped in wet funeral cloth. The herald. The one who prepares the way. Blade gritted his teeth. Hell had opened, and he was walking straight in. The infection spread faster than fire. By dawn, 3 blocks around the cathedral were sealed off by SWAT, but no one who entered came back out. Screams echoed from the windows, wet, gurgling cries that ended in unnatural silence. Blade stood atop a wrecked patrol car, watching the quarantine crumble. From inside, a woman staggered out, her skin bubbling like boiling water. Her jaw split open sideways, revealing tendrils that lashed at the air before she collapsed, convulsing. Her body didn't die, it began to change. Blade ended it with a silver stake to the spine. He knew the signs. This wasn't vampirism. It was something far worse. Deep inside the infection zone, Morbius awoke beneath the cathedral in a chamber of meat and bone. He could feel his cells screaming, evolving against his will. Veins pulsed with cursed blood. The voices never stopped. "You are chosen," they whispered, clawing at his mind. "You are the vessel." He stumbled through tunnels made from fused bodies, some still alive, blinking, silently mouthing "Kill me." He vomited blood. He needed control. He needed Blade. Blade cut through waves of warped mutants, vampires stripped of hierarchy and humanity. These weren't turned. They were bred. Their bones jutted out like spears, and their flesh twitched independently of their movement. In the heart of the carnage, he found the hive. A massive, living wall of corpses, breathing, moaning, trembling. From it, a childlike figure stepped forward, head swollen, eyes pitch black, skin translucent. "The god stirs," it said. "Feed us, hunter." Blade raised his sword. Morbius dropped from the ceiling behind him, his body writhing, fangs longer than ever, claws shaking. "I'm losing myself," he gasped. "But I can lead you in." Blade hesitated. Behind them, the hive began to open, like a mouth. And it was hungry. The tunnel into the hive's heart wasn't dug, it was grown. Flesh and bone formed the path, pulsing with a heartbeat that didn't belong to anything human. Blade and Morbius moved in silence, the walls whispering their names in languages they'd never learned. With every step, their minds frayed. Memories surfaced unbidden, twisted, wrong. Blade saw his mother not as a victim, but as a snarling beast begging to die by his hand. Morbius saw himself as a child, gnawing at his dying father's throat. The hive didn't just want their bodies, it wanted their truths. At the center, they found it, a black mirror suspended in a cradle of tendons, dripping crimson. It was ancient, older than the cathedral, older than blood. Morbius approached first, compelled by a force deeper than will. His reflection didn't mimic him, it mocked him. It showed him feeding on cities, draining oceans of blood, crowned in bone. "This is who you are," it whispered. "Embrace it." Morbius fell to his knees, trembling. His fangs pierced his own tongue. He didn't recognize himself anymore. Blade faced the mirror next. It showed him slaughtering innocents, smiling. Becoming what he hated. The Daywalker turned Dark King. He clenched his fists, blood seeping from his palms. "Not me," he growled, but the mirror laughed. Behind him, Morbius screamed. His eyes bled, wings burst from his back, and his flesh cracked open, revealing pulsing runes underneath. He wasn't changing, he was awakening. Then the mirror shattered, releasing a psychic shockwave that knocked them both back. From the shards rose a form, a creature of blood and glass, all eyes and mouths. It screamed like 1,000 voices crying out in hunger. "The veil is thin," it moaned. "The eclipse comes." Blade stood, shaken. Whatever this was, it had only just begun. The sky bled. Not rain, not ash, blood. Thick, warm, and alive. The eclipse had begun. Above the city, the sun turned black, and a red halo spread like a wound across the heavens. People screamed, their shadows peeling away from their feet, running in opposite directions. The streets cracked, and from the earth poured not lava, but veins. Pulsing, twitching, coiling around buildings like parasites reclaiming their host. The world was becoming something else. Something, hungry. Blade and Morbius emerged from the hive's core, both barely human anymore. Blade's skin was marked by glowing sigils burned into him during the mirror's shattering, while Morbius's transformation had accelerated, his voice echoed even when he didn't speak, and his veins glowed crimson in the dark. "The Crimson God awakens," Morbius murmured. "We have until the final phase of the eclipse. After that, nothing remains." As they ascended into the cathedral's tower, they saw the city swallowed. People fused into one another, twisted into meat spires, their minds broken and worshipping the sky. Above it all, the herald floated, his body unraveling, hundreds of arms reaching out, pulling in the faith of the dying. Blade loaded his last UV grenade. "You can't kill a god," Morbius said. "No," Blade answered, staring at the tower's peak, "but I can drag it into hell with me." At the summit, the altar cracked open, and from within, the god of crimson stepped through. It had no face, only a cavity filled with rotating teeth, and a crown of vertebrae. Reality itself bent as it moved. Blade's sword shook in his hand. Morbius wept blood. And then it spoke, in their own voices. "We were always inside you." Time stopped. Blood rose like tidewater. The fight against extinction had 1 hour left. And the god was smiling. The world tore. Not like fabric, but like flesh being ripped apart, nerve by screaming nerve. The Crimson God towered above the city, a storm of blood and bones twisting in its wake. Blade stood at the cathedral's highest spire, bathed in the light of the dying eclipse. Every breath felt like inhaling fire. His muscles burned, but the markings across his body pulsed with borrowed strength. The mirror's curse had tethered him to the god, and given him one shot. Below, the herald called out to the sky, its many mouths opening like rotten fruit. The hive surged upward, forming a living staircase of corpses and shrieking worshippers. Morbius, no longer fully man, soared beside Blade. His wings torn and bloody, his claws dripped with cursed ichor. "If I fall," he rasped, "don't let me turn." Blade nodded. There was no time for sentiment. The Crimson God turned, sensing its challengers. Its voice shattered windows, boiled blood, and fractured thoughts. "You are echoes. We are the scream." Morbius launched himself first, tearing through the herald with a howl. The herald exploded in a mass of limbs, shrieking praises even in death. Blade followed, leaping into the air, sword blazing with ultraviolet fury. He landed on the god's back, slicing into the hideous flesh. It didn't bleed, it laughed. The god thrashed, warping the sky, unmaking time itself. Buildings melted. People forgot they existed mid-scream. But Blade pushed deeper, carving through muscle, bone, and unknowable anatomy. At the core, wrapped in nerves and shrines of flesh, was a black heart made of mirrors. He drove his sword into it. The god screamed. Reality cracked. Blood rained upward. And Blade, covered in gore and light, fell with the pieces of a dying god. But something still breathed. Beneath it all, something else had awakened. The city was silent, suffocating in its own blood. Where the Crimson God had once stood, only a smoldering crater remained, a pit filled with shattered mirrors and burning flesh. Blade lay motionless, his body battered, his sword lost in the ruins. The eclipse had passed, but the world was not as it had been. The air was thick with ash, and the ground trembled with something that was not yet finished. From the smoke, a shape emerged, Morbius. His form was different now. Gone were the monstrous wings and hunger that consumed him. His skin still glistened with the remnants of blood, but his eyes burned with a strange, unholy calm. He had survived, but at what cost? His senses were sharper now, too sharp. He could hear the faintest heartbeat, feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet. And deep inside, he knew. The god had been severed, but its essence lingered, tied to him now, entwined with his very being. "It is inside me," he thought. "I am its vessel, its prisoner." But with that power came clarity. The whispers had stopped. The madness, the endless hunger, they were gone. He was no longer a slave to the Crimson God's will. He could feel the weight of it, like chains forged into his soul. But in that weight was freedom. Freedom to choose. He turned to Blade, who was struggling to his feet, his sword sheathed in the remnants of the god's flesh. "It's over," Blade rasped, his voice hoarse. Morbius nodded, stepping closer. "For now," he said, his tone colder than before. "But the blood, it never stops calling." And as they walked into the bleeding horizon, one truth remained: the world had been remade, and with it, the dawn of a new terror was on the horizon.